The average American household spends about $4,400 a year on groceries. Roughly a third of that goes to produce alone: fresh tomatoes, green beans, lettuce, squash. The stuff that used to grow in the backyard for nothing. Out behind the house, past the clothesline and the rain barrel, there was a garden that fed the family from May through October. The entire operation ran on almost $0. No fancy raised beds, no drip irrigation kits, no bags of designer soil from the garden center. Just dirt, water, sunlight, and a handful of tricks passed down from one generation to the next. We replaced those tricks with products. We swapped free solutions for expensive ones and stopped growing food because we convinced ourselves it was easier to buy it. Today, we have got 25 of those forgotten garden tricks, counted down one at a time. And number one is the single habit that made every other trick on this list work. By 1943, over 20 million Victory gardens were producing 40% of all the fresh vegetables in the country. That was ordinary families remembering what they had always known. The soil will feed you if you let it. Number 25, hand-pollinating the squash. Grandma walked out to the garden early in the morning with a small paintbrush or a cotton swab. Find a male squash blossom, the one on the thin, straight stem, and gently brush the pollen from the center. Carry it over to a female blossom, the one with the tiny bulge at the base, and dab the pollen right inside. The whole thing takes about 30 seconds per plant. Some years the bees did not show up in the numbers they used to, and if the pollen never reaches the female flower, you get no squash, no zucchini, no pumpkins. Hand pollination guaranteed a harvest even when the pollinators were scarce. You can do this with any cucurbit, and 1 minute of work per plant can double your yield in a bad pollination year. Number 24, sharing seeds with neighbors. After the harvest, Grandma saved seeds from the best plants. Tomato seeds dried on a paper towel, bean pods left to rattle on the vine, pepper seeds spread on a plate by the window. Then trade with the woman down the road. Swap green beans for her cucumbers. Give away lettuce seed to the family at church who just moved in. That informal seed network meant nobody had to buy seeds from a catalog every spring. Everybody grew something different, and everybody shared. The cost of starting a garden dropped to zero when the neighbors were part of the system. And the varieties that survived were the ones that actually thrived in your local soil and climate, not the ones a seed company told you to buy. Number 23, planting herbs along the border. Back in those days, the herbs did not go in a separate little garden. They went right along the edges of the vegetable beds. Basil next to the tomatoes, dill between the cabbages, rosemary at the corners, sage along the fence line. Those herbs served as a living fence against pests because most garden insects find their target plants by smell. A cabbage moth flies toward that cabbage scent, but when you surround the cabbages with dill and cilantro, you drown out the signal. The pest cannot find what it is looking for. When the herbs flowered, they also drew in pollinators and predator insects like hoverflies and parasitic wasps. One border of herbs did 3 jobs at once: pest control, pollination, and dinner. Number 22, tin can watering drip systems. Your grandfather would take an old coffee can, punch 4 or 5 small holes in the bottom with a nail, and bury it halfway into the soil next to a tomato plant or a pepper. Fill it with water. The water seeps out slowly through those little holes, delivering moisture straight to the root zone where the plant actually needs it. No water wasted on the surface, no evaporation lost to the sun. A row of buried tin cans along the garden kept the soil consistently moist without a hose running all afternoon. It cost nothing and worked better than watering from overhead because the leaves stayed dry, which meant less fungal disease. A piece of trash became the most efficient irrigation tool in the garden. Number 21, coffee grounds in the soil. Every morning, the used coffee grounds went straight out to the garden instead of the trash. Work them into the soil around blueberries, azaleas, tomatoes, and roses. Coffee grounds are slightly acidic and rich in nitrogen, which is exactly what those plants crave. They also improve soil structure by adding organic matter that helps with drainage and water retention at the same time. The grounds also repel slugs because they do not like crawling over the gritty texture. A free pest deterrent and a free fertilizer from the same cup of coffee you were going to throw away. Number 20, nasturtiums as pest traps. Here is a trick that feels almost too clever. Instead of trying to keep aphids away from the garden, invite them in on purpose and send them to the wrong address. Plant nasturtiums in a ring around the outside of the vegetable beds, about 6 to 8 inches apart. Aphids are wildly attracted to nasturtiums, far more than they are attracted to beans or peppers. The aphids cluster on the nasturtium leaves and largely leave the vegetables alone. Once the nasturtiums are covered with aphids, the ladybugs show up to feast. Pest, trap plant, predator. No spray required. Nasturtiums also attract pollinators and produce edible flowers that go into salads. One plant that serves as pest control, pollinator habitat, and food all at the same time. Number 19, straw bale gardening. If you had bad soil or no soil at all, there was an answer for that too. Set straw bales directly on the ground, water them heavily for 2 weeks to start the internal decomposition, then plant seedlings right into the top of the bale. The decomposing straw creates its own heat, its own compost, and its own growing medium. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, and cucumbers all thrive in straw bales. At the end of the season, the spent bale goes straight into the compost pile or gets spread as mulch on the garden beds. No digging, no tilling, no buying soil. A straw bale cost a couple of dollars from a local farmer, and that was the entire investment for a full season. Number 18, trellising with scrap wood and twine. Here is the thing. Nobody bought a trellis. They built one from whatever was lying around. A couple of old branches stuck into the ground at an angle. Some baling twine strung between them. Maybe a piece of chicken wire nailed to 2 fence posts. Beans, peas, and cucumbers climbed those homemade structures just as well as they would climb a $40 store-bought version today. Growing vertically was not just about saving space, though it did that too. It kept the fruit off the ground, which meant less rot and fewer slugs. It improved air circulation around the leaves, which reduced fungal disease, and it made harvesting easier because you could see everything at eye level instead of bending over rows. But here is what really made this trick special. A trellis changed how much food a small garden could produce. A single pole bean plant trained up a 6-foot twine produced nearly twice the yield of the same variety left to sprawl on the ground. Multiply that across a row of 20 plants, and you are looking at a serious difference in how much food comes out of the same patch of dirt. Families with small yards grew enough beans to can for the entire winter using nothing but sticks and string. That is the kind of return on investment that a garden center cannot put in a box. Number 17, the compost pile behind the barn. Every kitchen had a scrap bucket by the back door. Potato peels, carrot tops, apple cores, eggshells, coffee grounds, tea leaves. All of it went into the pile out back. Leaves got raked onto it in the fall. Grass clippings got tossed on in the summer. Over the course of a year, that pile of waste turned into the richest, darkest soil you have ever seen. Nobody bought bags of compost from the garden center. They made their own from food that would have gone to waste. A well-maintained compost pile produces about 500 pounds of usable compost per year from a typical household. That is enough to cover a 500-square-foot garden with a full inch of the best fertilizer money cannot buy. Number 16, letting chickens work the beds. After the harvest, when the garden was done for the season, the gate opened and the chickens went in. The birds scratched through the soil, ate every bug and grub they could find, pecked apart old plant debris, and left behind a layer of nitrogen-rich manure. By the time spring came around, those beds had been turned, fertilized, and debugged by a crew that worked for nothing more than kitchen scraps and a little cracked corn. The chickens got a free meal, the garden got a free cleanup, and nothing went to waste. Families who kept even 3 or 4 hens had a pest control and fertilizer system that ran itself from October through March. Number 15, succession planting all summer. Grandma's garden did not get planted in one weekend in May and called done. It went in waves, a row of lettuce in mid-April, another row 3 weeks later, and another 3 weeks after that. By the time the first row was harvested, the second was at its peak, and the third was coming up behind it. The same approach applied to beans, radishes, carrots, and peas. This meant a continuous supply of fresh vegetables from late spring through the first frost instead of one overwhelming glut followed by nothing. Succession planting squeezed every possible day of production out of the growing season. Number 14, cold frames from old windows. When a window broke in the house or a neighbor was replacing theirs, the glass did not go to the dump. It went to the garden. Build a simple wooden box, set it on the ground over a raised bed, and lay the old window on top as a lid. That is a cold frame. It works like a miniature greenhouse, trapping heat from the sun during the day and holding it through the cold nights. Seedlings went into the cold frame 2 to 3 weeks before the last frost date, giving the family a head start that neighbors without one did not have. But the cold frame did more than just start the season early. In the fall, that same box extended the harvest by protecting lettuce, spinach, and kale well into November when everything else in the neighborhood had died back from frost. Some families in the northern states built a second cold frame specifically for winter greens, keeping salad on the table through December using nothing but sunlight trapped under glass. A family in Vermont could be eating fresh spinach in November, while the garden center down the road had been closed since September. The whole thing was built from scrap wood and a discarded window, and the total cost was $0. That one piece of glass turned a 6-month growing season into 8 or 9 months of production for free. If you are finding value in these old garden tricks, a like and subscribe helps us keep making these videos. We genuinely appreciate it. Number 13, planting by the moon. This one sounds like folklore, but it was taken seriously for generations. Above-ground crops like tomatoes, beans, and corn went in during the waxing moon, the 2 weeks when the moon grows from new to full. Root crops like carrots, potatoes, and beets went in during the waning moon. The idea was that the waxing moon pulled moisture upward, encouraging leaf and fruit growth, while the waning moon drew energy downward into the roots. The Old Farmer's Almanac has published planting by the moon calendars since 1792. Whether the science fully supports it is still debated, but here is what nobody argues with. Having a structured planting calendar kept gardeners disciplined about timing and that discipline alone produced better harvests than winging it. Number 12, the Victory Garden mindset. During World War II, the government asked civilians to grow their own food so that commercial produce could go to the troops overseas. By 1943, over 20 million families had planted Victory Gardens. Those gardens produced 40% of all the fresh vegetables grown in the country that year. Think about that. Nearly half the produce in America came from backyards, empty lots, rooftops, and schoolyards. But here is what most people miss. The Victory Garden was not a new idea. It was a return to what people had already been doing before cheap grocery stores made them stop. The war just reminded everyone else. That mindset, the belief that a patch of dirt and some seeds can feed your family, costs nothing to adopt. Number 11, rotating crops every season. Grandma never planted tomatoes in the same spot 2 years in a row. Everything rotated. Tomatoes went where the beans had been. Beans went where the squash had been. Squash went where the root vegetables had been. Different plants pull different nutrients from the soil, and if you plant tomatoes in the same bed year after year, they deplete the same minerals and the soil gets exhausted. Rotation lets each section recover while a different crop uses what the last one left behind. Beans actually add nitrogen back through bacteria in their roots, so planting beans before a nitrogen-hungry crop like corn was like giving the soil a free refill. Rotation also breaks pest and disease cycles. Tomato blight spores that overwintered in the soil cannot infect the beans that replaced them. Number 10, eggshells around the tomatoes. Every cracked eggshell in the kitchen got rinsed, crushed, and scattered around the base of the tomato plants. Eggshells are almost pure calcium carbonate, and tomatoes need calcium to build strong cell walls. When the soil runs low on calcium, you get blossom end rot, that ugly black spot on the bottom of the fruit that ruins it. Crushed eggshells breaking down in the soil prevented that. The jagged edges also deterred slugs and snails because those soft-bodied pests did not want to crawl over sharp shell fragments. One piece of kitchen waste that served as both fertilizer and pest control. Number 9, the manure tea barrel. Let me paint you a picture. Out behind the barn, there was a wooden barrel filled with water and a burlap sack stuffed with aged cow or horse manure. That sack dropped into the barrel like an enormous tea bag and steeped for a week or two. The water turned dark brown and rich with dissolved nutrients. Then it got scooped out with a bucket and poured along the rows between the plants. Manure tea delivers nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium directly to the root zone in a form that plants can absorb right away. The manure came from the animals already on the property. The water came from the rain barrel. The burlap came from old feed sacks. The total cost was zero. Modern liquid fertilizer concentrates sell for $15 to $25 a bottle and do the same job. Number 8. Newspaper mulch between the rows. Every newspaper that came into the house got saved for the garden. Lay sheets 3 or 4 layers thick between the rows of vegetables and cover them with a thin layer of straw or grass clippings to hold them down. That newspaper layer blocks sunlight from reaching the soil surface, which means weeds cannot germinate. It holds moisture in the ground, reducing how often you have to water, and as the paper breaks down over the season, it adds organic matter back into the soil. But here is what made this trick so much smarter than anything you can buy today. Modern landscape fabric does the same 3 jobs but costs $30 to $50 per roll and leaves plastic residue in your soil for years. It does not break down, it does not feed the microbes, and it has to be pulled out and replaced every few seasons. Newspaper did all of it better, did it cheaper, and decomposed cleanly by the end of the growing season so you could till it right into the beds come fall. The weed barrier renewed the soil instead of contaminating it. And the supply arrived at the front door every morning for the price of a subscription that was already being paid for anyway. That is the kind of solution that costs nothing and leaves the garden better than it was before. Number 7, rain barrels under every downspout. What if I told you that every inch of rain that falls on 1,000 square feet of roof produces roughly 600 gallons of water? Wooden barrels or old wash tubs went under every downspout on the house. When it rained, those barrels filled up with clean, free water that was better for the garden than what came out of the tap. Tap water contains chlorine that can harm the beneficial microbes in your soil. Rainwater does not. It is naturally soft, slightly acidic, and plants prefer it. The entire garden got watered from those rain barrels using nothing but a bucket and gravity. During the growing season, a garden needs about an inch of water per week, and 2 or 3 barrels kept the supply steady between storms. Number 6, companion planting with marigolds. Marigolds went everywhere in the garden, along the edges of every bed, between the tomatoes, next to the squash, at the ends of every row. French marigold roots release a compound called alpha-terphenol into the soil that is toxic to root knot nematodes, the microscopic worms that attack plant roots underground where you cannot see the damage until it is too late. Above ground, the strong scent confuses whiteflies and squash bugs that navigate by smell. And when marigolds bloom, they attract ladybugs, hoverflies, and parasitic wasps, the beneficial predators that eat aphids and caterpillars by the hundreds. Pest control above and below the soil from a packet of seeds that cost a few cents. The most effective pesticide in the garden was also the most beautiful thing in it. Number 5, wood ash from the fireplace. Every winter, the fireplace or the wood stove produced buckets of ash that got stored in a metal can with a lid. Come spring, it was scattered across the garden beds and worked into the top few inches of soil. Wood ash contains 5 to 8% potassium, up to 20% calcium, and trace amounts of phosphorus, iron, and zinc. Potassium is essential for strong plant growth and disease resistance. Calcium prevents blossom end rot in tomatoes. Wood ash also raises soil pH, which makes it a free substitute for agricultural lime. The beauty of this is that it turned a waste product from heating the home into a multi-nutrient fertilizer for the garden, one system feeding the other. Number 4, burying kitchen waste straight in the dirt. Before there were compost tumblers and worm bins, there was a shovel. Dig a trench about 12 inches deep between the garden rows. Dump in the kitchen scraps, vegetable peels, fruit cores, coffee grounds, eggshells, and cover them back up with soil. The buried waste decomposes right there underground, feeding the surrounding plants as it breaks down. Trench composting has been used for thousands of years. There are no odors because the material is buried. No rodents because there is nothing exposed. No turning, no watering, no maintenance. The worms and soil microbes do the rest. By the next growing season, that trench was a band of the richest soil in the garden. Number 3, saving seeds year after year. This is where the most money got saved, generation after generation. Seeds never had to be bought more than once for any given plant. After the harvest, select the best tomato from the healthiest vine, scoop out the seeds, and ferment them in a jar of water for about a week. The fermentation dissolves the gel coating around each seed. Dry them on a paper towel, label them, and store them in a cool, dark place until spring. Beans and peas are even easier. Leave a few pods on the vine until they dry and rattle, pull them off, shell them, and store them. Those seeds stayed viable for 5 to 10 years. One packet of heirloom tomato seeds bought in 1955 could still be producing tomatoes in a granddaughter's garden in 1995. The key was using open pollinated heirloom varieties, not hybrids, because hybrids do not grow true from saved seed. Number 2, the Three Sisters Garden. This is a companion planting method that goes back centuries before anyone in your family touched a garden. Indigenous peoples across North America planted corn, beans, and squash together in the same mound. The corn grew tall and gave the beans a living pole to climb. The beans fixed nitrogen from the air into the soil, feeding the corn and the squash. And the broad squash leaves spread across the ground like a living mulch, shading the soil to suppress weeds and hold moisture. 3 plants, each one solving a problem for the other 2. No fertilizer needed, no trellis needed, no weeding needed. I will be honest with you, this might be the most elegant gardening system ever devised. This polyculture produces more total food per square foot than any of the 3 crops grown alone. Corn, beans, and squash at the grocery store will cost you real money. Growing them together in one mound costs you 3 seeds and a little patience. Number 1, growing from kitchen scraps. This is the one that held the whole system together. Before anything got thrown away, it was checked for whether it could grow. The bottom inch of a celery stalk, placed in a shallow dish of water on the kitchen windowsill, sprouted new leaves within a week. Green onion roots went into a glass of water and regrew their tops in days. Potato eyes went straight into the soil. Garlic cloves planted in the fall produced full bulbs by summer. Carrot tops rooted in water grew new greens for salads. Sweet potato slips pulled from a sprouting tuber produced vines that filled a whole garden bed by August. The kitchen was the nursery, the scraps were the seed stock, and the garden filled itself season after season from food that would have gone in the trash. That is the trick that made everything else on this list possible. Because once you realize that the food you eat can grow more food, you never look at a kitchen scrap the same way again. They did not have garden centers or online catalogs or drip irrigation kits that cost more than the food they produce. They had soil, sunlight, water, and a way of thinking that turned waste into abundance. Every eggshell was fertilizer. Every newspaper was mulch. Every kitchen scrap was the start of next season's harvest. They fed their families for free because they understood something we have been paying to forget. The garden does not need your money. It needs your attention. If this changed how you think about growing your own food, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of content, because there is a lot more to share. And drop in the comments below which of these 25 tricks you are going to try first. I genuinely want to know. See you in the next one.